In June 2014, the body of a young gay man was found outside a block of flats in Barking, London. The police wrote this death off as an accidental overdose, a mistake that would yield more bodies over the next 16 months. Each victim had a fatal dose of the drug GHB in their system, their mobile phones were missing, and there were signs that they'd been placed at the scene. Despite this, the Metropolitan Police continued to fail to link these cases, resulting in the death of a fourth victim before police realised they had a serial killer on their hands. Using gay dating app, Stephen Port, also known as the Grindr Killer, would lure young gay men back to his flat, where he would drug and sexually assault them before dumping their bodies minutes away from his home. This is the portrait of Stephen Port, also known as the Grindr Killer. Before I start, I want to give you a quick disclaimer. This case isn't as graphic as some of the other cases I've discussed, but it could still be upsetting for some. So if that's you, please click out of the episode, maybe I'll see you in the next one. In this episode, I'll be discussing the following: homophobia, drug use, drugging, sexual assault, rape, and murder. Okay, let's begin. Stephen John Port was born in Southonsea, Essex on the 22nd of February 1975. When he was 1 year old, his family moved to Dagenham in East London. Port's father worked as a cleaner for the local council and his mother worked at a supermarket. They were a traditional working class family who lived in a modest home. Port continued to live at his family home until his early 30s. Port did not have a good time in school. He was shy, quiet and unable to make friends, so he would sit alone during class. He was considered an oddball by his peers and was either bullied or ignored because of it. After finishing his GCSEs at 16, Port left school and went to art college. He studied there for 2 years but had to leave as his parents couldn't afford the fees. Port then studied to become a chef and got his first job at age 18. According to his sister Sharon, Port came out as gay when he was 26 years old, and their old-fashioned mother took the news badly. Stephen initially struggled to get on the gay scene because he lacked confidence. To combat this, he began to frequent the gym and wore a toupee to improve his appearance and began to use gay dating chat rooms and apps. An ex-partner described Port as childish, a trait that subsequently led them to break up with him. He explained how Port had an unusual obsession with children's toys and regularly visited toy stores to purchase the latest ones. Later, friend and neighbour Ryan Edwards describes Port as having a childlike personality and had once sat alone on the floor in the middle of a grown-up party playing with a toy lorry. Edwards also stated that Port was solely attracted to twinks, a term used to refer to young, effeminate gay men, and how he had noted a steady stream of young men visiting his flat. At age 31, Port moved from his family home into a one-bedroom flat in Cook Street, London. It is in this flat that Port would begin to date, rape and then progress to murdering his victims. At the time of the murders, Port worked as a chef at a Stagecoach bus depot in West Ham. Ex-lovers of Port would disclose to police that Port had started to regularly use the date-rape drug GHB and several other party drugs while seeing them. In 2012, Port came to the attention of police after a man had reported that he'd been drugged and raped by Port on New Year's Eve at his flat. The charges were eventually dropped. GHB is a sedative drug that is often referred to as a date rape drug. It comes in a clear liquid with no odour, making it easy to slip into victims' drinks unnoticed. In low doses, the drug can reduce inhibitions and heighten sexual drive and pleasure. For this reason, it has become a popular chemsex drug, particularly on the gay scene. Unfortunately, in higher doses, it can cause blackouts, immobility, unconsciousness, and overdose, which is why it is commonly used in sexual assault victims because they are easy to control and often can't remember the assault. It's a fast-acting drug, taking about 20 to 15 minutes to kick in. It's also strong, making it easy to get dosage wrong. Port would use various gay dating apps to hunt for hookups and victims. He would lie on his profile about his background, education and job to make him more appealing. In the space of just 16 months, Port would murder 4 victims. A gay dating app called Grindr was popular during this time. Port had used this app, so the media named him the Grindr Killer. Port's first victim was 23-year-old fashion student Anthony Walgate. Anthony occasionally worked as an escort using an app called Sleepy Boy, which is what Port used to initiate contact. He messaged Anthony offering him £800 for his services. Anthony met Port at Barking Station and the couple returned to Port's flat, where Port drugged Anthony with GHB and raped him. Anthony died because Port administered a fatal dose of the drug. On the 19th of June 2014, during the early hours, Port dragged Anthony's body just outside of the entryway to his block of flats and propped him up against the door. He then called emergency services from his phone, but didn't provide his name, and reported that he'd seen a young boy collapsed on the street. He then returned to his flat. Anthony was pronounced dead close to 8 a.m. that morning. Police informed Anthony's parents that their son had been found dead, but were unable to provide the cause of death. They told the parents they had discovered a small bottle containing the remnants of GHB. They managed to track down Port as the person who called emergency services via his mobile phone number and questioned him about the body. First, Port sticks to the story he provided during the 999 call. However, after being interviewed several times by the police, Port significantly changes his story. He admits to knowing Anthony, but maintains that Anthony had taken GHB himself and become unwell. Port advised that he had moved him into his bed and left him there when he went to work. When he came home, Anthony was dead, and so in a panic, he moved his body to where the police had found him and called it in. Police hadn't found Anthony's mobile phone and asked Port if he knew where it was. Port said that he didn't. Police believed the story and closed the case as an accidental overdose. Anthony's family found the conclusion hard to believe because Anthony didn't take drugs. Port is charged with perverting the course of justice because of the significant change in his statement regarding Anthony's death. His computer is seized and his DNA is taken, and he is released on bail. Police do not search through the computer, and so they miss significant evidence that Port has been drugging and sexually assaulting young gay men. 22-year-old Gabriel Kavari, an art student from Slovakia, was Port's next victim. Gabriel had moved to London and was looking for a place to stay. He initially rented a room from a landlord, John Pape, for 6 weeks, but after getting into a relationship with Port, he eventually moved in with him. Port had introduced his new boyfriend to his neighbour Ryan. When Gabriel is alone with Ryan, he tells him that Port is a bad man and that Ryan doesn't really know him. Unfortunately, Port returned, so the conversation quickly changed. The relationship is short-lived. Only a few days after Gabriel moves into the flat, he goes missing. Port had administered a fatal dose of GHB and sexually assaulted Gabriel before dumping his body against a graveyard wall at a nearby church, the Church of St. Margaret's in Barking. His body was discovered by a lady walking her dog through the cemetery on the 28th of August 2014. The post-mortem reveals that the cause of death was a drug overdose. Police have also found a small bottle of GHB on the victim, so the police conclude it was an accidental overdose and close the case. Port informs his neighbour, Ryan, that Gabriel has become ill and returned home to Slovakia, where he died shortly after. He advises Ryan not to comment on Gabriel's social media because it would upset the family. Daniel Whitworth, the 21-year-old chef from Kent, is Port's third victim. Just 1 week after murdering Gabriel Kavari, Port begins to message Daniel through an app called Fit Lads. On the 20th of September, just 3 weeks after murdering Gabriel, Port drugs, sexually assaults and then dumps Daniel's body in the same graveyard as Gabriel. Unfortunately, Daniel's body was found by the same woman who had found Gabriel's body. Again, she was walking her dog through the church grounds. Daniel's parents began to worry when he didn't return from a shift at work and failed to return to work the following day. Police attended the family home to inform the parents that they had found their son dead with a suicide note and an empty bottle of GHB in the grounds of St. Mary's Church. Daniel had a blue sheet placed over his legs. The police did not forensically test the sheet or the suicide note. Port had placed the fake note on Daniel's person, which claimed Daniel was responsible for Gabriel's death and so had committed suicide as an act of remorse. The parents are not convinced that the note is genuine and inform the police that they are unsure if they recognise the handwriting. They also explain that their son was not an illegal drug user and so the letter didn't make much sense. Police record that the parents have confirmed the suicide note's authenticity, and although they can't account for the bruising found on Daniel's body, suggesting manhandling, they conclude that Daniel had died of an intentional overdose and close the case. At this stage, friends and family of the victims begin to question the police about the similarities in the three deaths, and their suspicions that they are connected. Still, the police assure them and the press that the 3 cases are not linked or considered suspicious, and no further investigation is required. In March 2015, Port pleaded guilty and was convicted of perverting the course of justice related to Anthony's case. He was sentenced to 8 months in prison but was released on licence in early June 2015 and placed on the tag for the remainder of his sentence. Inquests for both Gabriel Cavari and Daniel Whitworth were held in June 2015. John Pape, Gabriel's previous landlord and friend, inquired if any relevant information was gathered from Gabriel's phone. The police officer present did not have any records regarding Gabriel's mobile phone. During Daniel's inquest, the coroner recorded concerns about the lack of forensic testing. The police had failed to test the suicide note and the bedsheets found at the scene for any forensic evidence. The police had also failed to have the handwriting on the suicide note professionally analysed to confirm its authenticity. They couldn't account for the injuries the pathologist had found on Daniel's body, which were consistent with being manhandled before his death. The coroner records 2 open verdicts, which means that the evidence available did not fully or clearly explain the circumstances or cause of death. Regardless, the police closed all related investigations. In September 2015, forklift driver Jack Taylor, aged 25, becomes Port's last murder victim. Jack and Port had started messaging each other via the Grindr app during the early hours of September 13th. Jack caught a train, arriving in Barking at 3 a.m. Port meets him and the couple walk back to Port's flat, where he is drugged, sexually assaulted and murdered. Jack's body is discovered the next day in a park next to the Church of St. Margaret. He was propped up against the other side of the wall where the previous victim had been found. Jack was missing his mobile phone and had track marks on his arm. A needle was found in his pocket and a white powder was found in his wallet. Again, the police assume an accidental overdose as the cause of death. Jack's sisters, Donna and Jenny, became frustrated with the lack of information the police were providing regarding Jack's death. The sisters start to investigate the events that lead to their brother's death. Through research online, they discover the previous victims and created a timeline. They regularly contact the police looking for updates. Eventually, the police agreed to show the sisters where Jack's body had been found. They informed the sisters that they had collected numerous clips of CCTV footage that showed Jack walking with an unidentified man and the route that they travelled through the Barking town centre at 3:15 a.m. on the 13th of September. The police maintain that they lose sight of the couple and then see footage of Jack walking towards the park. The sisters are appalled that the police have not found out who the man is and urge police to look into the footage again. When they do, the police realise that they have made a mistake and that the CCTV footage showed Jack and the man together walking in the opposite direction, away from the park. The person walking into the park had incorrectly been identified as Jack. The police eventually agree to release the footage to the public to see if they can identify the unknown man. A member of the public identifies Stephen Port, and Port is arrested 2 days after the footage was released. The case becomes a murder investigation and is taken over by the Metropolitan Police Murder Investigation Unit. The families who have been led to believe that their sons had committed suicide by the police were now being informed that they were in fact murder victims. Port was charged with 4 counts of murder and 4 counts of administering poison in 2015. By the time of his trial in November 2016, Port had been charged with 4 counts of murder, 10 counts of administering poison, 7 charges of rape and 4 of sexual assault. These charges related to 11 victims in total, including the 4 murder victims. Port continued to deny all charges and entered a non-guilty plea via video link from HM Prison Belmarsh. During the trial, Stephen Port showed little emotion. Jurors were informed that the police looked through his internet search history and found several disturbing Google and porn site searches, like unconscious boys and drugged and raped. The court was informed that Port often watched this type of porn in the hours leading up to each murder. Several young men who had survived their encounter with Port provided testimony of their horrific experience of being drugged and raped by him. Videos on Port's phone showed men being filmed whilst unconscious. The police provided forensic evidence connecting Port with the bodies. They had finally tested the GHB bottles found on each victim, the suicide note and blue sheet that were found with Daniel Whitworth, and the sunglasses that were found with Gabriel's body, all came back with Port's DNA on them. Port was convicted on all counts and was sentenced to a whole life tariff order on the 25th of November 2016 at the Old Bailey. This means he will never be released from prison. He is currently incarcerated at Belmarsh Prison. Police came under significant criticism regarding this investigation. Inquests into the 4 deaths highlighted the fundamental failings of the Metropolitan Police and concluded that these failings probably contributed to 3 of the 4 deaths. I believe some of the families of the victims have received undisclosed amounts of money as compensation after filing lawsuits regarding the numerous investigatory failings of the Metropolitan Police. Following the first death, the police took Port's laptop and his DNA, which they put in the database. If they'd carried out forensic tests on any of the following victims, DNA evidence linking Port to the murders would have been found. If they had checked his laptop, they would have found evidence of his deviant sexual tastes, as well as communications and footage linking him to victims. Had they questioned people who knew the victims or Port more thoroughly and believed them, they would not have continued to wrongly conclude that the deaths were all accidental or intentional overdoses. Stephen Port was not a genius killer. He left DNA evidence on every victim. He even dumped the bodies close to his flat. He didn't manage to murder 4 people because of his skill or wit. He killed 4 people because the police were incompetent and lazy. The families of the victims have said that they think homophobia within the police force was the main factor in why police didn't carry out effective investigations into any of the victims' deaths. The police maintained that this was due to funding and staff shortages. Based on what I've learned, I think it's both. When you're in a place where you have to prioritise cases because of lack of resources, you are going to have to use your judgment to decide which case is more important. Most of the police force is straight and will have limited knowledge of LGBTQ culture. So if your only experience of people within the LGBT community is through policing, of course you're going to develop negative stereotypes and beliefs about those individuals, because whenever you encounter them, they're involved in crime. Of course that's going to affect your judgment. And this is why it's important that institutions like the police force hire people from different backgrounds, from minority communities, so that you can have these people helping write legislation and provide insight into cases like this. It's really important, and it should definitely be in a better place than it currently is right now. Anyway, that's all I have for this one. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. If you got something out of this episode, please consider giving it a like. If you want to see more episodes, make sure you click the subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss anything. But that's it for now. I'll catch you in the next one.